Hello, this is the Bureau of Lost Culture. I'm Stephen Coates.
First party at Ken Kesey's with Hell's Angels. Cool black night through the redwoods. Cars parked outside in the shade behind the gate. Stars dim above the ravine. A fire burning by the side porch and a few tired souls hunched over in black leather jackets. In the huge wooden house, a yellow chandelier at 3 a.m. and the blast of loudspeakers, hi-fi, Rolling Stones, Ray Charles, Beatles, Jumping Joe, Jackson, and 20 youths dancing to the vibration through the floor. A little marijuana in the bathroom, girls in scarlet tights, one muscular, smooth-skinned man sweating, dancing for hours, beer cans bent, littering the yard, a hanged man sculpture dangling from a high creek branch, children sleeping softly in their bedroom bunks, and 4 police cars parked outside the painted gate, red lights revolving in the leaves.
We were just listening to Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead's interpretation of Allen Ginsberg's poem First Party at Ken Kesey's. It's just one of the tracks on 2 amazing albums of musical takes on Ginsberg's collection, The Fall of America from the late 60s. One of my guests today is Jesse Goodman, who produced those albums with the Allen Ginsberg Estate and an astounding array of artists, as we're going to hear. And right now we're hearing a selection of a musical setting of Ginsberg's poem Iron Horse, and this is from a new album by Youth. Youth is an award-winning British record producer. He's produced a huge range of artists, everybody from Kate Bush, Credit House, The Orb, KLF, The Verve, Guns N' Roses, Primal Scream, amongst many others. He was the bassist of Killing Joke, member of The Firemen with Paul McCartney, and he was the founder of the first psychedelic trance record label, Dragonfly. All sorts of other stuff. And as we're going to hear, he is a deeply countercultural spirit and poet. Now, if you're hearing this in early 2024, Youth and Jesse and a host of other special guests, Ian Sinclair, Barry Miles, Pat Thomas, will all be appearing at our Ginsberg in London events in March exhibition and all sorts of happening. There's links to them and all the above in the show notes, or check it out at bureauoflostculture.com. Now, as we've heard before, beat poet, Buddhist, activist, provocateur Allen Ginsberg had a marked impact on the birth of the counterculture here in the UK. His Fall of America series blends poetry, travel writing, personal experiences, radio news, broadcasts, popular songs, newspaper headlines, and his own observations from the years 65 to 71 when he was crisscrossing the US, exploring a system of composition by narrating directly into a portable reel-to-reel tape recorder that Bob Dylan had given him. The collection is a study of contrast, natural beauty slammed right up against ugliness that rose out of the tensions of violence of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. Ginsberg was convinced perhaps that America was teetering on a precipice. But events such as the moon landing and the death of Che Guevara, as well as the death of his friend Neil Cassidy, former lover, are also subjects. We're going to hear more selections from Iron Horse and the Fall of America albums. I'm going to dig into Allen's life, the counterculture, of course, and music, because Jesse Goodman and Youth are here with me right now. Welcome.
Great, thank you.
Youth, I wanted to start by reading something that you wrote earlier this year. Okay. Star Sailor, Bright Blue Sky Dreamer, Arts Lab Interloper, Instigator, Catalyst, Playwright, Performer, Actor, Poet, Lover, Architect of the Yin Yang Uprising, You Say You Want a Revolution, Free Love, Feminism, Germaine Greer, Dancing Naked with the Trees, Prime Mover, Groover, Alchemical Reducer, Kindly Shopkeeper of Cosmic Dreams, Activist, Anarchist, Cannabis Crusader, Candidate Mayor with Druid's Wizard's Cape, Publisher of Horticultural Visions, Homegrown Brainstorm Comics, Pioneer of the Fearless Freedom, Circadian Cycle, Symposium of Shamans, Avalon Avatar, Arthurian Night, Glastonbury Pilgrim, Crystal Quest, Street Poet Happenings, and The One True Star, introducing Ginsberg to Megatripolis. That, you probably remember, right, is your tribute to your friend
Lee Harris. Yeah. It's my homage, elegy to him when he died. Loosely based on the old lip-snapping, finger-licking Coca-Cola ads we had in the 70s for the poster of this one continual stream of conscious poem.
The reason I read it, I mean, that obviously Lee Harris, you know, lately departed and obviously a countercultural figure. But the reason I read that is that, you know, that's you writing about a countercultural figure, and counterculture, which is the kind of broader subject of this show, but also what we're going to talk about today with Allen Ginsberg. I mean, that's a big part of your life. And I thought what's quite interesting in your case is that you're somebody, seems to me, who's bridged both. You've produced a lot of very big successful artists, and yet you consistently throughout have remained countercultural.
I never considered it in that way, but maybe you're right. It's a hard balancing equilibrium to find.
Is it?
I think so, because if you look at 60s counterculture and a lot of the prime movers of that, Oz magazine, for an example, which came out of the Drury Lane Arts Lab, London Free School, altruistic cooperatives and collectives that instigated the Summer of Love, in fact, very important. And, you know, part of that achievement not only was Notting Hill Carnival, but these magazines, Oz and International Times, which, you know, which were set up to provide a countercultural information service to young people that couldn't find it anywhere else.
Right.
They had to raise funds for that. So there were a lot of fundraisers. Pink Floyd's first gig was a fundraiser for the Arts Lab. And UFO Club, famous psychedelic club in the 60s, also came out of the Arts Lab. And Lee Harris was a member of the Drury Lane Arts Lab and did outrageous performances and crazy theatre there, and it's remained a massive inspiration for me. I mean, I instigated a South London Arts Lab about 5-6 years ago for the same purposes, really.
I've had a couple of people previously on the show, and I think I had to move on from thinking you've got the counterculture and you've got the mainstream culture and they're in opposition, because it's like, it isn't really like that, is it? It's a sort of cycle between the two, like a counterpoint.
Going back to Oz magazine, 3 people started that: Felix Dennis, Richard Neville, and one other guy. After the Summer of Love had faded, Felix became a very successful publisher of general cultural stuff and a bit of porn, I think. But he definitely, and kind of a little bit like Richard Branson, kind of started off with these altruistic countercultural ideas, and then they became the mainstream, you know. And sure, it's a slightly more informed mainstream, but it's not that different from what was there before. It's very hard to go into the mainstream, penetrate mainstream culture, whilst remaining true to the ideals of the counterculture. I mean, that's what I've consciously, subconsciously always tried to do. I've always felt you shouldn't be afraid of the mainstream. You want to connect, you want to communicate, and you want to do it as broadly as possible without the compromise that often comes with it, ideally. And that will take underground culture into the mainstream and slowly make, you know, everyone more aware of it and normalize it until it becomes that what you're promoting in a way. And that, imagine if the Summer of Love had never happened in the 60s. Imagine what life would have been like today. I mean, you know, we'd still be living in grey and burgundy 50s. That would be it.
The mainstream culture is completely dependent to get refreshed on the underground, the counterculture, for its inspirations.
Yeah.
They always get sucked up and monetized.
Well, that's right, because, you know, counterculture comes from the idea of a libertarian, Dionysian, boundless expression. I mean, and mainstream culture is bound up in capitalism and materialism. And yeah, quite often the capitalist mainstream culture, the corporate cultures will appropriate those pure, idealized countercultural ideas and sell them back to the mainstream as a corporate thing. I mean, everyone does it now, and it's got a stronger cachet and weight to it now because the world is far more corporate and locked down and regulated. And so any kind of whiff of the scent and perfume of countercultural freedom and liberty is utterly irresistible because it's such a rarefied thing.
The person that we're going to talk about today, Allen Ginsberg, is somebody also who stayed countercultural throughout his entire life, right? Even though obviously he became a national figure, international figure, he certainly could have taken advantage of the potential to monetize his thing. And you just tell me, first of all, when did you come across Ginsberg?
I think possibly through Lee Harris, actually, when I was about 17. And he started giving me a sort of thorough mystery school education in counterculture and beat culture, where all roads meet through the lens of Ginsberg, really.
So through the poems?
Through the poems, activism, also through getting into Dylan, which took me a little while, and Ginsberg's a massive part of Dylan, and Dylan's a massive part of Ginsberg. I mean, Dylan's also an artist that I think you could argue has penetrated the mainstream and still retained his countercultural roots, whatever they are, whether it's Christian rock or whatever it is he's into at the time. He's unafraid about expressing it, and that's quite countercultural. But in the last 20, 30 years, I've been writing a lot of poetry. So Ginsberg also comes up working with McCartney. We spent a lot of time talking about Ginsberg and his influence. And he knew him and hung out with him a lot. And you see the influence of Ginsberg on the Beatles, 60s. I mean, there's no one else that has that kind of weight of influence, I don't think.
Jesse, what about you? What was your first experience of Allen?
Yeah, I mean, it brings, me back to just being, in high school, pretty boring, mainstream, getting up to run track on the weekends and, wanting something more, more interesting, more magical. And my really first exposure was, going to my first Grateful Dead concert, getting exposed to that world, seeing that there's an active counterculture that still exists. And through their music, I just, from my own curiosity, dug deeper through their songs about Cassidy and all the other figures of that time. So it was through their music that I then opened up into, really researching or rather kind of pulling out my parents' books on the beats and discovering Allen, who was always there. I just didn't really, spend much time reading his poetry or getting into it. So that was kind of my first exposure.
And then you ended up working with the estate, the archive.
With the estate, yeah. It's kind of amazing because I read these things as a 16-year-old and then kind of getting into the beats and all of that. But then, some years later, I find myself working in Allen Ginsberg's office a few years after he had passed. I was living across the street from the last place that he lived, where he actually passed away, on First Avenue, where his office was. And I started to scan his photos before they sold the archive to Stamford. So I spent each day just kind of pulling photos out of a box. And one day it'd be Thelonious Monk. The next day it would be, just these giant figures, and trying to decipher his handwriting on the back of the photos, because he put these little blurbs about the picture, entering that into a computer.
Well, thankfully, he was a sort of inveterate collector, wasn't he? And a sort of self-archivist. So there's all this stuff, and
an unbelievable archive of material. I was just lucky to be able to have my hands on it.
Right. And of course, the events that we're doing at the Horse Hospital are around that, with Pat Thomas's book that's coming out, which is mining that archive, and the events that you guys are doing, right? And Miles is the little exhibition of Barry Miles' sort of personal connections with Allen, and some of that stuff's lovely to see. The stuff that Allen gave Miles. But On the subject of poetry, right, and youth, you just mentioned then, I mean, last year you were doing a little tour, weren't you, in Wales, where you were reading poetry. One of the things which struck me, I don't know much about poetry, but in May 65, Ginsberg arrives in London, gives a free reading at Better Books, which, you know, Miles was behind the counter. And it was an event described by Jeff Nuttall as the first healing wind on a very parched collective mind. This thing that provided this sort of impetus for the International Poetry Incarnation, the Royal Albert Hall. The idea that you could have the Royal Albert Hall full of poets, and that itself triggered or helped to trigger the British counterculture. I mean, that's quite something, that poetry, in the figure of this man and the other poets there, could do that, isn't it?
Poetry's so powerful, but, it's still very maligned and ignored medium. Most poets really struggle to make a living, But I suppose also one of the big introductions for me with Ginsberg was his famous poem How. I saw the best minds of my generation
Starving, hysterical, naked.
Yeah. And that really resonated with everyone, I think. And that was 50s, wasn't it? So that really kick-started the counterculture then and there. Mind you, I've had it explained to me by Lee and others that counterculture goes back to the shamans in the caves 50,000 years ago. And before the Beats, it was Paris in the 20s, and before that, the salons of London in the 18th century. Back. And there is a kind of continuity and a thread and that links it all. And what's amazing for me is that, as you say, that one reading in one bookshop then precipitated the Albert Hall Poetry Olympics, which many people say was the catalyst for that summer of love to come. And yet it's a completely maligned underground medium, but for some reason poetry still today talks much louder than books, movies, records, anything in some ways, because of its sparsity and it's just a few words on a blank page. It can actually trigger a tsunami of feelings and emotions and images. That's still very powerful and poignant. And Ginsberg remains a huge influence. When I do my own poetry tour, like the one in Wales, I'll often start with a harmonium with myself. Then I'll bring in some random people that I ask the promoter to bring in, musicians who are local, harp player, guitar player, drummer. And I just say, look, we're going to do a jam in D, and I'll carry on, just play whatever you feel and respond to the words. And even then, during reading the poem, I'll then just go off on a tangent and start composing and freestyling. And that will end up somewhere I had no idea where. And that kind of experimentalism, you see it, actually far more in art, with painters and great painters who fearlessly go into those unknown areas. But it happens in music and literature too, and it's always incredibly rewarding when you do it. It's terrifying because no one knows what's going to happen. But that's part of it. And then by taking that first step, that sort of road rears up to meet the foot, and then you just keep going. And that's that's so inspiring to do and to see. Yeah. I recently Damo Suzuki from Cannes died, who's another great experimental freestyle performer. His quote was like, you should never do the same performance twice. It should always be fresh, and I really like that. And I think and that kind of fearless courage in being that creative always pays dividends. When I'm working with artists, if there's a kind of writer's block, we will always default back to the Ginsberg Burroughs cut-up technique. Stop being kids again, having fun, making patterns out of words, seeing what things emerge. Very quickly things come through. Often it's all about sidestepping your conscious mind. And tapping into...
Sort of trusting that the unconscious is going to kind of speak in some way.
And in many ways it will speak the truth far more eloquently than the conscious mind, because... it's coming from a different place, I think.
Jesse, you were going to jump in there, weren't you?
And I was just going to say that in a way, that's how we, Peter and I, who manages the Allen Ginsberg Estate, and it's very much how we conceived of and brought forward the Fall of America project. We weren't restrictive about it. We weren't, we just followed a kind of almost an unknown creative flow.
Right.
And we allowed the project to take us in a direction. It pulled us forward. And we got some amazing results, not to mention some of the results with youth, but it was following the flow. And we really didn't, we didn't restrict our process during that.
We were talking just before we started about risk, weren't we? And there's that sort of risk of trusting to the moment. And like as you say, it can go horribly wrong, but at the same time, it can go terribly right.
And get great results.
Yeah, so no, absolutely. And we're going to talk about those projects as well. Just for me, interestingly, so I didn't come across Allen through poems. I came across through Miles talking about him in terms of a friend, right? And what struck me about him, which relating to what you both just said, is that he comes across as this extraordinarily generous person and also a collaborator, right? The sort of generosity of being a collaborator rather than being like the solo diva in some sense. Can you relate to that, Youth, in terms of what you were saying about, the risk of the moment and working with other people?
Yeah, Ginsberg, very generous spirit, I think. I mean, and also completely committed. I mean, you read his diaries. Even when he's writing his diary, it's a poem, and it's like a continuum of the previous bit of poetry or diarist entry, and it just continually flows, and that's an ideal state of being that we should all aspire to, where we're flowing and being creatively all the time, and it's certainly something I aspire to. And and I think that comes with being generous spirited and being open to collaborations or doing things differently and working with collectives. People have the idea of the poet sometimes as being, the shepherd on his own on the mountain, and some are, but in other ways, the poets where they're most needed is in the urban cities where people are beaten down by the machinations of society. Those little shards of poetry that pop out are the light that guides our way and brings us back to who we really are.
Yeah, and I suppose in Allen's case, it spilled over into his activism, right? So.
Absolutely, and spirituality. What I love about Allen, and I think it's nice serendipity that we're talking about him on Valentine's Day, because he was clearly a very loving person. It comes through in his writing and poetry, and he loved hard and deeply. Nevertheless, he was incredibly promiscuous and free, and he was like that with his spirituality as well. I mean, he was very into Tibetan Buddhism and shamanism and Hinduism and all kinds of things, right? And for him, there's no contradiction between one or the other, and being able to embrace it all and use it as nourishment and food for his own ministry of sorts is also very inspiring. No limits.
The power of Allen and the love that he brought forth, it's bringing people together.
Right. Still.
Decades after his death.
Right.
And Peter and I always say it's a kind of gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
He's still bringing people together. And
I like that word ministry as well. I mean, that's got this feel of actually going out there, hasn't it? You're going to minister to the people. When Miles spent the summer on the farm, with Allen working on his tapes, and basically set this place up as a kind of refuge for kind of his washed up friends, junkie poets and beat musicians and desperados, and just very generously were like, okay, you can come and stay here, clean up, maybe dry out or whatever it is, or just take a break. And it was difficult times. There's some difficult people there. He managed to use his resources for the benefit of the community.
Yeah, very inspiring.
To really live it rather than just dress it, Let's talk a bit about the present then. And you talked about the fall of America, Jesse. So you and Peter Hill from the estate had this idea that to reach out to musicians and to basically give give permission, as it were, to use Alan's work as the basis for creating music, and done these 2 amazing albums with an incredible lineup of people: Ai Weiwei, Thurston Moore, Lee Ronaldo, Scanner, System 7, Philip Glass, DJ Spooky, Howie B, Bill Frisell, Andrew Bird, Devendra Banhart, Yola Tengo, Gavin Friday.
Yeah, I do kind of pinch myself.
It's quite a list, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we were a bit taken aback by how this project sort of took on a life of its own. Peter and I have been friends for a long time. We've done a lot of projects together, and we trust each other in that process so well. And so we, with the 50th anniversary of Fall of America coming up, 50th anniversary would have been around 2021. We started to think that there would be a great idea to combine our love of music, of Allen, of also a body of work that's not as well known to the wider public as some of his other poetry. So, we thought this would be a great idea. Let's see if it sticks. And we kind of put together a loose proposal, if you will, of saying to artists, hey, create your own song, sample Allen, mash it up, do what you feel is right. And then a huge thanks to Miles, because he's the unsung hero is the archivist. If it wasn't for the work he did on the farm, pulling all of those amazing versions of Allen reading those poems together and preserving them, we wouldn't have the foundation for this project. So it's,
that when Miles turned up at the farm, Allen hadn't told him that there wasn't any electricity.
Yeah.
So they had to actually rig up a windmill on top of the hill. It's his tape machine.
It's amazing.
The Fall of America, which is this collection published by City Lights, covers the years 65 to 71. Allen's crisscrossing the country, exploring a system of composition by narrating into the portable reel-to-reel tape, machine. And it's characterized by this prophetic tone inspired by Blake and Whitman. It's the poems from that collection that went out there and created, you've done these two extraordinary albums, right? And we're going to hear something from them. One of the things that happened is that you went out to youth who didn't do a track, but did a sort of took Iron Horse, the poem, and what happened?
Yeah. Well, it's a 36-minute poem. So it immediately reminded me of KLF's Chill Out, actually, which is an imaginary road journey through American landscape and an ambient classic. And the poem itself, because he was writing about being on this train journey from the West Coast to Florida, seemed like this amazing road trip, even though it was a rail trip. And I thought, it sort of, I could hear, as I was reading it, I could hear a similar sort of soundtrack. So my first idea was, let's do a kind of ambient soundtrack to it. And because the poem, I thought, is a snapshot of where America was at spiritually and everywhere else in 1965 or 66 when it was written. I thought, let's make the soundtrack a kind of an American soundtrack. It's ended up becoming more like a European Komish Kraut drone piece, actually. But it goes into jazz and all kinds of different areas. It was just a fantastic piece of work to dive into. It took me quite a long time, but I was actually in Spain, and I've got a studio in Andalusia, and I spent about a month on it in lockdown, just adding to it and developing it and taking it bits away and refining it into what it is. And I was amazed by it at the end, and I thought, well, this is something quite special. Of course, it's never going to fit on one of the CDs.
That's right, 33 minutes. Take up an entire side of the vinyl as well, yeah.
Yeah, so it became a sort of a digital bonus track if you bought the vinyl. But it went down really well with the reviewers. And we thought it was significant enough to maybe warrant its own release. So that's happening here in March. And then I reeled in Alex from the Orb and got an Orb remix to to add to it.
Night darkling on Mojave Desert, yellow planet light disappearing over mountains westward, soldiers asleep rocking away from the war.
Beautiful.
One altar light headed towards the disappearing sun. Pew, 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 cry the children, pulling each other's arms. What on earth to live on? It's amazing stuff, isn't it?
It's amazing.
It's amazing. And you know what was really striking as well is that, like, because obviously the Vietnam War's going on, it still feels so relevant.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The world is a harder, more brutal place now than it was even then. Even though we had different challenges, then it was more nuclear war was the great threat. Now it's still coming back, nuclear war, actually. A conscription they're talking about again now. I mean, we've gone back into, populist right-wing fundamentalist sort of 50s world again, of paranoia and fear. But that you reading Iron Horse there reminded me of a record I made with Alex from New York called Little Fluffy Clouds, where I sampled Ricky Lee Jones in an interview talking about the blue, purple, pink, fluffy skies. You know, of course, the evocation and the invocation of that place. Ginsberg could bring you into the desert and those skies with just a few sentences. You're there.
Totally.
Well, absolute master magician for that, I think.
Totally, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and Jesse blends not only that, without being literal about it, it's the war, Vietnam War at the time is there, and yet it's also very personal.
Yeah, Youth created a deeply moving and powerful track, and to accompany that poem, I remember first receiving it and lying down on the couch and going on that journey, because that's what it is, and you just listen to those words and the music that accompanies it, and it's just a very, very powerful combination.
Iron Horse. Night darkling on Mojave Desert. Yellow planet light disappearing over mounds westward. Soldiers asleep, rocking away from the war. One auto light headed toward the disappearing sun. Pew, 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 cry the children, pulling each other's arms. What an earth to live on. Lights of the city, south, brightening a piece of the night, and the diamond green gleam of a light on an airfield. Hey, you bit me, you bit me. Hello, Mrs. Fight. Green, green, green blinks the sign of a diner where the truckmen roam in the darkness toward Barstow. This space capsule, softer than trees in the chemical landscape with the click of electronics. And is heaven any different from where we are? How could it be better or worse? Though delicate chemical changes in the brain, ethereal sensations from Muladhara sphincter up through mind aura promising another universe. Whitman, Carpenter, Gavin Arthur saying, we are leaves on the tree, saying, we are drops of water headed toward the ocean, running through the fish's mouth. And we shall stand together in the flesh in paradise. With the virgin of the 19th century, borax, 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 crystal lights upon a hill like fairy castles, might be in heaven, only Mojave. Borax, 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 the dinosaurs lounges through the fronds under Pleiades, the delicate filament of highway lights, the nerves between cities. Borax, 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 borax near the Belmar Motel on the desert. This is mine enemy, my machine, the chatter jabber of the mind, making borax, 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 borax. The spinal column of all thought or turkey's oiled wind headlights. But a child peeps out of the curved glass onto the moving night, where a red taillight keeps its time to the Santa Fe train, rolling over Hart Crane's gloom. Oh, a crescent moon. Mr. Cummings and Mr. Vinyl both dead. Cigarettes and alcohol and the 181st Airborne. They'd be better off puffing a peaceful pipe of opium or sipping a sepsi of keef in a cafe, getting high by the green fig trees staring at the ocean side or the Straits of Gibraltar blue. The tricks are what makes business. You got a college education, it ain't what you got, it's what you do with your college education, son. And they're all actors, waiting at Barstow, the engine humming. I want to be an entertainer. I want to be a comedy writer, he said, his hand stained with Vietnamese blood, the engine humming, all others silent, lost in thought. And the soldier talked all about his troubles with his red hair, and how he took his girl home after 3 drinks when she squinted her eyes at him and said, I want to go with you. And how he drove her to her house and said, I'm giving you a last chance. And how she leaned her head on his shoulder and said, anywhere you're going, take me. And how he took off her pants. And she said that he should take off his pants. And he wouldn't take off his pants. And how they'd have some love play like everybody. And then he'd drive her home. But when he's out at a bar, if anybody looks at his girl, he looks him in the eye and snaps his finger and says, what are you looking like that for? And when he's out at a bar alone, anybody is fair game for his love. For his love.
Does that take you back to that time in lockdown when you were sort of sequestered in Andalusia and deeply in it?
Well, I mean, having a studio there was like, having a little portable spaceship that would take me out anywhere. Working on that and listening to it immediately teleports me into the Mojave Desert on that train with those soldiers and those conversations he translates. It's a heady cocktail of imagined experience, and that's what I live for, is other people's expression of their experience eloquently put, whether it's Ginsberg, whether it's Joyce, whether it's Solzhenitsyn or anything, that fills me with inspiration and joy from my own experience. And of course it's about seeing the fantastic in the real, in the ordinary, and Ginsberg's a master at just describing what's going on around him in an ordinary way and making it fantastic. It's Murakami, the Japanese writer, is another great exponent of that, but many poets can do that as well. And in fact, a good technique for writing poetry when you've got a bit of a block, I find, is you kind of go through your senses. So you start going through, you write down 5 things you can hear at that moment. Then you go to 5 things you can touch, 5 things you can see. By the time you're halfway through the second or third one, you're into a trance state and a poetic state, and things just start flowing. And I've used this technique many times with artists, from the most unknown Green kid to McCartney. When they have a block, let's just write down what we can hear, what we can see, what we can feel. Also a great technique of just bringing you into the present. And of course, when you're in the present, then another magic occurs, because most of the time we're living, fear of loss, hope of gain, past, future dynamic. When you're fully present in the moment, then another magic, fifth element comes in, I think.
Reading Allen, you go into that trance state, because the cadence of the words and the way that it's been written, if you read Hal, you get brought into the moment and brought into that similar type state.
And listeners, to let you know, with Youth's album Iron Horse comes a rather lovely book which has got the poem itself in, which is something, but also his illustrations. I didn't realise these were your illustrations, and they've got something of Allen in them. I'm actually looking at one here where he's not quite sure where he is, but you can see his rather large penis in this one. He's sort of bouncing across some cosmic plane. But excellent. So
we've had a lot of conversations about Alan's penis over many a night.
We're going to see. We're not going to see it, but we're going to see some images of it.
Representation of it.
Yeah. We're actually going to see some photographs of it in the exhibition at the Horse Hospital, because there's a great picture of him and Miles. I think it's at Alan's birthday party.
Yeah.
When Everybody's there in suits and little ties and stuff, and he's completely naked. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I like to get naked as well. I mean, I love that Alan's quite open and free about his sexuality and about being naked and about our sexuality, you know, because we're still in a very prudish Victorian mindset about it. Despite everything we've gone through in the 60s, there's still a great fear of it. And I think it's still deeply tied up with our subliminal, subconscious, religious backgrounds and stuff. There's still very few people who can address it and into just part of us being human, you know, which...
Yeah, but also what strikes me is that was quite brave, because he was always out at a time when, I mean, in this country, you know, until 1967, after 67 or 68, you know, you know, homosexuality was illegal. And even then it was only illegal if you were above 21 and in private, right? And he was out and proud, wasn't he? And that took some, forgive the expression, but that took some balls at the time, didn't it?
Absolutely. Don't forget, some of the people executed in the UK were hung for homosexuality. Right. I mean, that is so shocking today to think that it was an actual death sentence. Never
mind the sort of death you could potentially face from your fellow citizens just by being lynched or something, right?
Yeah, so we have moved on a bit since then. And I think Alan will be happy to see the LGBTQ community in full support from the public now and celebrated as it is. But still a long way to go yet, you know. With the drawings, it was one of my greatest honours to be able to illustrate that poem as a book. And I'm still blown away by it. But I have been... drawing since I was a teenager. Of course, Ginsberg's own drawings kind of inspirational as well. Can't wait for them to come out and see how they're received, you know.
Jesse, we're going to hear a couple of more tracks from The Fall of America. And just before we do, I mean, it's quite a portentous title, isn't it, The Fall of America?
Yeah.
I mean, at the time that it was written, I can imagine that the sense of doom that permeated the entire culture, given what was going on, didn't fall then, but we feel like, I don't know about you guys, but it feels like to me like we're in another kind of doom-pervaded sort of times, aren't we?
The releases of Fall of America Volume 1 and the second volume was almost too much right on the nose just to have the titles Fall of America. And oftentimes Peter and I would be trying to explain that, you know, that it was less of, there obviously were dark clouds over that period of time for sure, but Alan's kind of giving sort of words and a pathway out, you know, he's giving hope and optimism as well. And so, we don't want that to get lost in the title or in the poetry itself.
Also, I mean, I sort of read it two ways. I mean, potentially you could see it as the fall of America, like the fall of the American Empire. Right, but also you could see it in terms of like the fall of America from its most noble ideals, human rights and democracy and freedom and all that thing, which it also stood for. And it's almost like falling from that, falling from those standards.
It's a warning to take heed.
Well, listen, in terms of the tracks that we're going to hear, I like the sound of this one, Wales Visitation by Seb Taylor, the Kaya Project. Tell us, how did Alan... write this particular piece?
He'd been in Wales and on psychedelics, and just describes the intense experience that he's had. And I absolutely love that poem. And when I reached out to my friend Seb around this project, and Seb came back and chose Wales Visitation, which I was secretly hoping he would. And the track that he created with his group Kaya Project, it really cushions the poem. It allows the poem to breathe and come through, but it just kind of puts its arms around the poem, and it's beautiful. I love it.
White fog lifting and falling on mountain brow. Trees moving in rivers of wind. The clouds arise as on a wave. Gigantic eddy lifting mist above teeming ferns. Exquisitely swayed along a green crag glimpsed through mullioned glass in valley rain. Bardic, oh, self, visitazione. The lambs on the tree-nooked hillside this day bleating heard in Blake's old ear, and the silent thought of Wordsworth in eld stillness. Clouds passing through skeleton arches of Tintern Abbey. Nameless as the vast babble to vastness. All the valley quivered, one extended motion, wind undulating on mossy hills. A giant wash that sank white fog delicately down red runnels on the mountainside, whose leaf-branch tendrils moved a sway in granitic undertow down. And lifted the floating nebulous upward, and lifted the arms of the trees, and lifted the grasses an instant in balance, and lifted the lambs to hold still, and lifted the green of the hill in one solemn wave. A solid mass of heaven, mist-infused, ebbs through the veil. Wavelet of immensity lapping gigantic through Anthony Valley, the length of all England. Valley upon valley under heaven's ocean tonned with cloud hang. Heaven balanced on a grasp.
There's three versions of, or three interpretations of this poem, Death on All Fronts, on these two albums, and this one by Lang Lee. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, so again, pretty just incredible short poems, dark in some ways, a bit ominous, and for whatever reason, that poem, more than any other, really resonated when we kind of put it out there to a number of artists. Number of people chose that poem, and we were put in touch with Lang Lee, who lives in South Korea. Peter and I had a real motivation to try to broaden this project and not just reach out to the sort of New York artists that we already sort of kind of know, and we could get involved in the project. And so thankfully we were able to get some Japanese artists, but also Lang Lee, and she translates the poem as well, and then kind of splices it with Allen's reading and then her reading as well.
And we've also got a version by Gavin Friday.
Yep, with Howie B. That's right.
Yeah, good to see him in it. And also sort of hip-hop version by Y.
Because we did not put any kind of parameters, we ended up with 3 different artists choosing that poem. And the thing is that they're all very, very different. And so one of the interesting things about this project is how the different styles of music give you a different way of interpreting, digesting the poem. So in a way, I was really thankful that 3 different artists chose Death on All Fronts.
Orions chasing the immovable bear halfway across the sky that winter. I waked earlier in bed, fly corpses covered gas. My headache, left temple, brain fiber throbbing for death. I created on all fronts. Poisoned rats in the chicken house, myriad lice sprayed with white arsenic filtering the brook. City cockroaches humped on country kitchen floors. No babies cut earthboards and girl hordes by half. Breathe free, say revolutionary expert computers. Couldn't sleep, creating musical visions. I called an exterminator who soaked the wall floor with bedbug death oil. Also my brain with death oil. I wake before dawn dreading my wooden possessions, my Gnostic books, my loud mouth, my old love's silent charms turned to image money, my body sexless, fat, father dying, earth cities poisoned at war. My art hopeless, mind fragmented and still abstract. Pain in left temple, living death.
sick, sweet planet. Orions chased the immovable bear halfway across the sky from winter to winter. I wake earlier in bed. Fly corpses cover glass-lit sheets. My head aches. Left temple, brain fiber throbbing for death I created on all fronts. Poisoned rats in the chicken house and myriad lice sprayed with white arsenic filtering to the brook.
A new moon looks down on our sick, sweet planet. Orion's chased the immovable bear halfway across the sky from winter to winter. I wake earlier in bed, fly corpses cover gaslit sheets. My head aches, left temple brain fiber throbbing for death I created on all fronts. Poisoned rats in the chicken house and myriad lice sprayed with white arsenics filtering to the brook. City cockroaches stomped on country kitchen floors. No babies for me. Cut earth boys and girl hordes, my half and breed.
We've got this event with you and Miles in conversation, and then you're going to do a musical intervention around Iron Horse at the Horse Hospital on the appropriately on the 15th. We sort of subtitled it Alan, musician and muse, right? So played himself the harmonium, and you collaborated with all sorts of people. Also, what is it about him or his work that's been a sort of ongoing inspiration to musicians?
Like many great artists, Alan is a fan, and he's got great discernment in his taste. You see that in other great artists. Another associate, Patti Smith, very similar. And because they're so imbued in those artists' work that they love and writers, it speaks through them. Now, I find that really inspirational, and getting into those artists gets you into other artists through the lens of their appreciation, and eventually the idea, I suppose, is to get up onto the high Sierras where Alan and Patti Smith are standing, be able to breathe the air they're breathing, and find that hopefully informs your own work, you know. So the great thing about being an artist, I think, it's the best job in the world, but it's the hardest job in the world because it's so elusive and so ephemeral and fickle, and you're always crossing the abyss of terror, despair, doubts, failure to get there, you know. But that's the heroic quest of it. That's the Arthurian angle and the mystical angle that also those great writers write about, and also encouragingly for you to take that on board and do the same. You know?
There's this sense of them having led the way, have climbed onto the high Sierra to cross the abyss in front of you, so therefore it's encouraging that you might be able to do so as well.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, bang on.
As we sort of approach the end, I just wanted to talk a little bit, as we were a bit earlier, about counterculture, where we're at now, and you know what's coming or what could come. We've had 2 summers of love in this country, 67 and then 87, I guess, right, Ethan? I know you've been a lot more involved in that second one. So my question to you is that are we due a third?
Absolutely.
And what's going to bring it about?
I keep pushing it. I keep putting on little events and calling them Summer of Love events, and putting it out into the ether that's coming. And I'm hoping the reincarnation of the Poetry Olympics 60th anniversary in 2025 we're working towards with the Ginsberg Estate and Harvey Goldsmith to anniversary performance at the Albert Hall. We're pushing hard on that, and I'm hoping, you know, that event and many other events will see the cyclical return of the Dionysian spirits, and that's coming in. But I think on a political, general, geographic level, it's been encouraging seeing these autonomous zones spring up over the last 10 years. East London, Berlin, people kind of dismiss it as hipster culture, but I think it's a renaissance of that counterculture, and also young, creative, artistic people finding a way around the obscene disparity between rich and poor, and the high rents and very little opportunities to squat now, or find an autonomous zone where you can have the time and economy to explore your art and work with other people. So, but I'm sure that's going to get bigger and bigger. The idea of what people call digital nomads now is all part of that.
That's come up so many times, but we're here in the middle of London, right? A place that, say, when Allen came to better books, people could live in the centre of the city. Same in New York, Jesse, right? There was room and space and headspace for artists to develop, right?
Yeah.
That feels like it's been squeezed out of London.
It's an absolute criminal act by governments today of denying the last couple of young generations the freedom to explore their youth and their lives, forcing them to either go to university and get into huge debt or live at home with their parents. There's very little alternative. And nevertheless, the spirit burns bright, and they will find their way, and they will find their alternative. The self-determination of being able to be creative through online things now is inspiring. I'm very positive about the future. But I think, and also now Pluto's gone into Aquarius, so that could be one of the triggers for the age of Aquarius, which is more liberal, open-minded, free human expression.
Jesse, can poetry play a part in this putative renaissance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listening to you, I said, I'll be there right next to him every step of the way, instigating the next summer of love, whatever it takes.
Thanks very much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture. Youth, thanks so much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Terrific stuff. Well, there's links to Youth's Iron Horse album and to the Fall of America albums and to those upcoming Ginsberg events in the show notes. Great to hear Youth on the subject of counterculture, creativity and his working methods. We're going to invite him back for more on those very soon. Thanks to him and to Jesse and to Peter Hall of the Ginsberg Estate for all their work and contributions. And thanks to you for spending your countercultural time here with us at the Bureau of Lost Culture. We appreciate it, and as ever, very nice to hear from correspondents. And my regular correspondent Ronnie Thomas sent me another present, a Pink Floyd beer mat. Excellent, thank you, Ronnie. Keep it coming. Keep your suggestions and mail coming. It's great to hear from friends. We shall hear more from other guests with other countercultural stories from the underground, from the other side, next time. In the meantime, let's close with some more from Youth's Iron Horse.
Lights of the city south brightening a piece of the night, and the diamond green gleam of the light.
Signals from air, 19 nights old, nowhere to go, oh iron horse, see the lightning flash, I'll turn their head to heaven,
So I sat and I listened and I brooded in my beard till I looked at him and I saw he was ugly, though his voice beautiful, Edward Carpenter. Now, lying here in my cabinet, in complete darkness, with a microphone on my chest, looking out at the airfields passing by, stars, a few, in the blackness outside, the modern railroad window doubled to reflect passing gas.